Kasigau Corridor, late afternoon. An elephant stepped from the thinning brush, her body shadowed by dust and low light. Her right rear leg dragged behind her, stiff and swollen, the foot unable to plant firmly on the earth. Each step pressed an awkward rhythm into the dry soil, a rhythm that broke the stillness of the corridor's edge like a drum-struck wrong. For days, rangers had scanned the thickets for signs of her. Reports had mentioned blood and limping, but the forest had kept her hidden. Now, as the heat softened and acacia shadows stretched long across the clearing, she came into view alone. Her flanks bore streaks of dried mud, caked and cracked from an earlier wallow. Near the injured leg the mud had worn thin, rubbed away by movement or perhaps by the constant attempt to reach the wound with her trunk. Her ears moved slightly, not in agitation but to catch the shifting breeze. She made no sound. Her gait was slow and deliberate, but not weak. She carried herself forward, not with strength, but something quieter, maybe resolve, maybe exhaustion. Emmanuel, a wildlife volunteer from the lower station, stood motionless near a stone outcrop 70 meters off. He'd been walking back from a broken pipe repair when he saw her cross the dry trench. Through his binoculars, he studied the way her back sloped downward and how her breathing rose shallow against her ribs. No sign of a calf. No herd nearby. Just one wounded elephant moving across an open corridor as if every step counted. She paused at the far end of the clearing. The leg hung slightly lifted behind her now, trembling from the effort of keeping weight off. Her trunk lowered to the dust, brushed it, then rose to her mouth. She repeated the motion slowly, dusting herself as elephants do. But this time without purpose, without conviction. It was as though she was trying to feel normal, even as her body betrayed her. The wound wasn't visible from this distance, but Emmanuel could see the signs: inflamed tissue around the knee and an unnatural outward twist of the joint, perhaps the result of an old snare or spear. The corridor was sometimes used by pastoralists moving cattle. Conflict wasn't new here. What mattered now was that she was out in the open, and she couldn't run. If she moved wrong, she could collapse. If night fell before help arrived, she could be vulnerable. If infection had already spread, it could be too late. A pair of hornbills broke the silence, fluttering up from a low bush to her right. She didn't react, not even a head turn. Emmanuel watched the way her trunk now hung still, curled slightly inward, as if conserving what little energy remained. She wasn't panicking, she wasn't calling, she was waiting. He reached slowly for the small radio on his belt, keeping his eyes fixed on her shape. "Adult female located," he said, voice low. "West trench line. She's alone. Severe limp." She turned her head slightly then, her eyes scanning the stretch of dry land beyond. The horizon was quiet. No dust trails, no signs of others. And still, she stayed in place. A gust of wind carried the scent of bark and old heat. Somewhere behind her the leaves rustled, but she made no move to return to the brush. Emmanuel lowered the radio. His breath caught for a moment as she shifted weight, her good leg trembling now too under the strain. But she did not fall. She stood there, halfway between wild cover and man-cleared path, in the last light of afternoon. A presence made heavy not by size, but by silence. Something was wrong, and she wasn't hiding it anymore. The elephant moved again just after sunset. Her body turned slightly toward the trench, not in urgency, but as if nudged by something deeper than thirst. Emmanuel had been watching from the ridge, crouched behind a patch of dried euphorbia. The wind had shifted, bringing his scent toward her, but she didn't seem to care. Her ears twitched once. Her injured leg dragged behind her with every step, the skin around the joint now visibly cracked and raw. The wound was worse than he'd thought. She reached the edge of the trench but didn't drink. Her trunk hovered over the shallow water, brushing the surface once, then rising again without drawing. Flies clung to the damp creases around her wound, but she didn't swat them. She stood still as if caught between the ache in her body and the dull comfort of the open land around her. Emmanuel waited until her gaze shifted to the far side of the clearing. Then he stood slowly, keeping his body low, and moved to the slope without sudden motion. He didn't walk toward her. He knelt in the dust a few meters from the trench's edge and placed the metal flask down beside a stone. It was dented and painted green once, with a small leather loop tied to the lid. He unscrewed the top and let the water trickle slowly into the dust, not enough to soak the ground. Just enough for the scent to carry. She turned her head, not fast, not alarmed, just slow recognition. Her eyes, dulled by fatigue, rested on him without tension. He kept his hands visible, said nothing at first, then softly, "It's okay, girl." Her trunk lowered again. This time she didn't touch the trench. She moved it toward him, but only a few steps. Her body shifted, hesitant, the good leg planted, the bad one trailing with a quiet scrape. She stopped short, not close enough to reach the flask, but near enough that he could see the texture of her skin, the dust flaking off her back like brittle bark. Still, she didn't drink. She didn't sniff the air again. She just watched him. For a moment, neither moved. The sounds of evening returned, a francolin calling from the bush line, distant baboons settling in the hills. The wind lifted briefly and a low rustle passed through the grass. Emmanuel stayed where he was. If she turned now and left, he wouldn't follow. If she lay down, she might not rise again. The risks were unchanged. If she didn't drink, dehydration would worsen the infection. If she didn't rest, her other leg might fail under the strain. If she left this place, they might lose her again by morning. Still, he didn't reach out. She would decide. Her ears moved again, once forward, then back. A deep exhale left her chest, stirring the dust in front of her feet. Then, with no warning, she folded her legs and lowered her body to the earth. Not collapsed. Lowered, controlled, slow. Emmanuel's breath caught in his throat. She was down now, lying on her uninjured side. Her eyes stayed on him. She didn't flinch when a cricket leapt near her trunk. She didn't close her eyes. He stayed beside the flask until the stars began to show. Then, without a word, he stood and walked backward into the dark. She never looked away. The last of the daylight clung low across the clearing, casting long lines in the dust as the elephant remained motionless beside the trench. Her body had barely shifted since lowering herself hours earlier, her great frame pressed unevenly into the cracked earth. The curve of her spine rose and fell, slow and uneven, her breath a quiet struggle beneath skin drawn tight with fatigue. Her trunk rested limp along the dirt. Occasionally, it lifted a few inches and fell again, as if testing the weight of air. She had not moved to drink. The trench was just within reach, but she hadn't touched it. The water in the flask lay untouched, too, drying slowly into the earth. Emmanuel watched from the edge of the bush line. He had not left. Through field binoculars, he tracked the smallest signs: a blink, a twitch of muscle, a faint shiver along her flank when a mosquito passed too close to her wound. The leg was swelling further now, tight with inflammation. The skin above the joint had darkened. Infection was gaining ground. She had made no attempt to rise since dusk. A wild elephant does not lie still in the open without reason. Her silence wasn't peace. It was surrender. The risk now had shifted. Earlier, it was about mobility. Now, it was about survival. If she stayed down through the night, circulation could slow and organs might begin to fail. The pressure on her ribs, the weight of her own body, all of it compounded. If she rolled onto the wrong side, she could suffocate slowly without a sound. Her ears twitched once, not at a sound, but as if stirred by memory. Then they stilled again. The air around her was quiet. A soft wind moved through the corridor, lifting specks of dust and leaf husks across the trench. Her eyes, barely open now, reflected nothing but the fading light. Emmanuel stepped forward, one measured pace at a time, then crouched down again. Far enough not to crowd her, close enough to be seen. He spoke just above a whisper. "Not yet," he said. The elephant did not answer and did not shift, but her eyes blinked once. Then again. He radioed the station, voice low, clipped. He requested immediate vet assistance, stating the animal was non-responsive but not unconscious. The weight of urgency sat heavy in every word. If she deteriorated further, lifting her would become impossible. If the sun rose on her in the same place, her chances would drop. If she resisted sedation, they would have nothing left to do but watch. A single black drongo landed on a low branch above her, calling twice into the still air. She didn't move. Even flies now wandered freely across the wound without being brushed away. Her body had stopped protesting. Her body had stopped protecting itself. Yet she remained upright on one side, chest heaving but not yet failing, and though her trunk no longer reached, it curled faintly at the tip. A signal not of strength, but of presence. Emmanuel stayed kneeling for another hour until stars began to flicker through the canopy. The sounds of the night returned, faint calls, distant hyena whoops, and the brushing of small things in the undergrowth. But she remained the stillest shape in the land, and in the dimness, with breath shallow and ears still, she did not disappear. She endured. Emmanuel waited until the sky paled. Light crept softly over the grassland, laying thin gold across the edges of the trench. The elephant had not shifted in the night. Her body remained curved against the earth, trunk curled but unmoving. Once or twice her chest had tightened and released in visible shudders, but now her breath was steadier, quieter. No new blood pooled around the leg. No flies buzzed from her mouth. But the wound itself had worsened. Swollen now to twice its size, the skin stretched thin, pink and black where the infection had pushed through. The vet was still hours away. If they waited too long, the swelling might reach her abdomen. If that happened, no sedation would hold. If it ruptured internally, she would die where she lay. Emmanuel moved without words. He walked from the shade carrying only a small tin basin, gauze, cotton, and a folded strip of cloth to bind what he could. In the other hand, he held a bottle of antiseptic mixed with saline. He approached from the side where her eyes could follow him. Slow steps pressed into the earth like a ritual. She did not rise. She did not lift her head, but her ear turned slightly. Her eye caught the flicker of morning light on metal. He knelt by the injured leg and poured a slow stream of liquid over the wound. The antiseptic ran clear at first, then pink as it touched raw skin. A low, soft sound came from her chest. Not a cry, not alarm, just air pushed gently from lungs. He waited. His hands did not move again until her breathing settled. He reached with a square of soaked cotton and pressed it carefully into the crevice where the spear had broken flesh. The tissue there was cracked and blackened in the center with thin threads of pus tracing outward. She flinched once. Her trunk shifted against the ground, then settled. She did not strike or retreat. She stayed. Her silence was not absence. It was consent. He continued. Cotton, press, clean. Another stream of saline. A thin thread of blood trickled down her leg, bright and wet. When it reached the dirt, it darkened fast and vanished into the dust. A red-winged starling passed overhead. The elephant blinked, slow and unafraid. One rap, then another. Emmanuel moved the cloth gently beneath the curve of her thigh, bringing it over the wound without tension. His fingers brushed her skin. It felt hot, alive, but on edge. If the infection pushed higher, her lungs could fail. If the bleeding worsened, she could fall into shock. If her herd didn't find her in time, she might not have the strength to rise at all. But this was what they could do. Clean, bind, wait. He spoke once. "You're doing good, girl." The words hung low in the air and fell quiet. The cloth held. The gauze stayed in place, and the elephant, still watching him, let her trunk move. It rose a few inches off the ground and fell gently across her own leg, just below the bandage. A gesture without purpose, but not without meaning. Emmanuel stepped back. Dust clung to his knees. His hands were stained. Behind him, the trench caught morning light in a soft curve of reflection. And beside it, one wounded elephant breathed in and let him go. By the time the first truck pulled into the corridor, morning had already crept through the branches, casting soft light over the dust-coated grasses. The sky was pale and wide, silent but alert. 2 rangers stepped out with the vet, their boots crunching the brittle ground as they approached the slope above the trench. The hum of the engine faded. The birds quieted. All eyes moved to the elephant, still lying there, her body half in shadow. She had not shifted since the binding. Her breath came steady now, but slow. The cloth around her wound held firm, though the outer layers had browned with dried blood. A swarm of flies still circled, but none dared land long. Her trunk was curled again, but not tightly. It lay relaxed across her leg. Her eyes opened when the engine stopped. She saw the movement, but she didn't rise. Emmanuel had stayed through the night, sitting at her side, his back against the trunk of a fallen tree nearby. Now he crouched again, one hand resting gently near her ribs. His eyes met the vet's. No words had passed yet. The elephant hadn't made an attempt to stand, and Emmanuel knew what that meant. If she couldn't rise with her own strength, there was little they could do without sedation. But if they sedated her and she panicked, the damage to her leg could become permanent, or fatal. The vet signaled to wait. No one moved closer. Emmanuel pressed his palm against her flank, fingers spread. The skin was warm beneath a thin layer of dirt. Her body rose slightly with each breath, her chest tightening with effort but never pausing. She was still fighting, but quietly now, without urgency. They tried once, a soft call, a shake of feed, and a step forward from one of the rangers. The elephant only twitched her trunk, exhaled through her nostrils, and went still again. Her ears did not lift. Her leg did not shift. If she didn't stand soon, her circulation might fail. If they sedated her here, they might not wake her. If they waited too long, the morning heat would rise, and with it, her stress. Emmanuel looked to the vet again and then back to her. He leaned close, letting his hand slide gently along her shoulder, slow and even. His voice came in a whisper, just above the sound of the leaves. "You can stay," he said. And she did. She made no move to rise, but she didn't flinch when the vet approached and crouched nearby to observe the wound. She didn't react when the cloth was gently lifted, the edges of the bandage examined. Her breathing remained unchanged. She did not reject them, but she stayed down. Eventually, the vet leaned back on his heels and nodded once. They would wait. No sedation, no forced movement. If she rose, it would be by her own will. The sun climbed higher, brushing the tops of the brush in pale orange. Time passed without measure. Birds returned to the trees. A troop of vervets chattered softly from a nearby slope. And still she lay there beside him, unmoving, unafraid. Emmanuel stayed close, the dust clinging to his clothes, the silence held between them like a thread. Every now and then her eye would flick toward him. She didn't follow the others with her gaze, just him. And as the morning wore on and the wind began to stir through the grasses, she pressed her trunk lightly against the earth. Not to rise. Not yet. But to remain near him, in stillness, in trust. The light turned soft as late morning stretched across the corridor. Shadows shortened, heat thickened in the air, and the low sound of insects rose through the brush. Emmanuel had not moved far. The vet remained close, hands folded, gaze steady on the resting shape before him. The elephant still lay on her side, breath shallow but measured. No effort had been made to rise. Her body, once towering and restless, now held the shape of quiet endurance. From the slope beyond the trench the first silhouette appeared, barely visible at first, a slight shift in the ridgeline brush, followed by another. Ears flared, trunks lowered to the soil, but no calls were made. Just presence. A soft gathering. 4 elephants, then 5. They stood at the edge of the ridge, their shapes clear in the golden haze. Not clustered, spaced apart, but turned toward her. Each one is still, unmoving except for the slow rhythm of breathing, the rise and fall of skin under ribs. They did not advance. They didn't call. But they didn't turn away either. One was younger and smaller than the others, with tusks barely grown. He moved a step forward, then stopped. The others remained in place. There was no sign of alarm, no sign of retreat. Below them, the injured elephant stirred. Her trunk shifted, brushing the dirt. Her eye opened, slow, tracking movement uphill. Her ears twitched, then folded slightly, then fell still again. Her chest rose more firmly now. The herd remained silent. Emmanuel glanced up at the ridge. It wasn't clear if they were family or just nearby travelers drawn by scent and presence. But elephants did not linger without reason, and they rarely stood still for long unless they were waiting. If this was her herd, they had already passed through this corridor without her. If not, they were choosing to stay anyway. Either way, their presence changed the risk. If she attempted to rise now and failed, they might flee, startled by movement. If they moved too close too soon, her panic might undo what little healing had begun. If nothing changed at all, the distance between her and the living herd might become permanent. The vet whispered something low, a reminder, perhaps, of time. The heat was growing. Her position wasn't sustainable, but nothing in the herd moved. She exhaled again. The breath was deeper than before. One of the older females turned her head slightly, shifting her weight, but not leaving. Her eyes widened, held open, then settled again. A quiet stance of patience. Another of the elephants lifted her trunk, scenting the wind, then lowered it. The injured elephant blinked once. Her ear flinched, then steadied. The muscle in her side flexed faintly. Emmanuel felt it beneath his hand, a signal of tension or readiness. He pulled back just slightly, giving her space. No one moved closer. No one moved away. The herd simply watched. The grass around them moved in slow patterns with the wind, the dust drifting gently between bodies. In the open, under the sun, with space between them and the one who could not yet rise, they waited. And though no sound passed between them, the silence carried weight. And she, resting still in the dirt, was not alone. ChatGPT said, "For hours the heat pressed down. The sun moved slowly and high over the corridor, its weight falling heavy across the backs of all who waited. The vet and rangers had retreated to the tree line for shade, their eyes fixed on the same still figure in the dirt. No one spoke. No one called. They had done all they could. The elephant had made no effort to rise. Her ears had stopped twitching. Her trunk, once faintly restless, now rested flat and unmoving. Her breath came steady but shallow. She had not closed her eyes. Emmanuel remained near her flank, kneeling just behind the curve of her ribs. He did not touch her. He sat quietly, his presence deliberate but not forceful. The herd was still visible at the hilltop, 5 unmoving shapes silhouetted against the late morning sky. Their bodies were fixed in the same direction. None had wandered. None had turned away. Every hour she remained down brought greater risk. Her blood flow slowed in the limbs beneath her. Muscles began to stiffen. The heat made dehydration more severe. If she remained like this much longer, even if her will returned, her body might no longer respond. Emmanuel waited for a sign. Anything. A shift of weight, a change in breath, a twitch of the shoulder. Then, near midday, she exhaled deeply, not sharp or startled, but long and low, a sound that cut through the dust. Her trunk lifted a few inches. It hovered, trembling in the air, then fell gently against her leg. He moved closer, slowly. His hand reached out, palm open, resting near her shoulder. Not pressing, just contact. For a long moment, nothing followed. The dust stirred. The wind moved. Then, with a soundless breath, her leg flexed. The first try failed. Her shoulder tensed and her front legs pushed against the earth. Her weight shifted, but her rear leg gave under her. She fell back with a soft thud. She lay still. Emmanuel stepped back, not rushing, not retreating, just allowing space. Then she tried again. The second movement was stronger. Her forelegs extended fully, bracing. Her trunk curled and pressed against the ground for balance. The wounded leg dragged, unsure. She groaned low in her chest. The herd did not move. One ear lifted on the hill. Emmanuel stayed close. With a final push, she lifted her weight, trembling, breath shallow and strained. Dust clung to her flank. Her rear leg shook beneath her, the bandage still tight against the wound. But she did not collapse. She stood, bent, uncertain but upright. She did not trumpet. She did not look for water. She only stood still, the wind catching along her ears, lifting the long fringe of skin. Her breath came ragged. Her body swayed. But she stood. Emmanuel stepped beside her, hand still open. He touched her gently, guiding her attention toward the waiting truck. No ropes, no calls, just a quiet nudge of presence. She limped, one slow step, then another. The front legs moved carefully, placing each foot with thought. The back leg dragged, the wound resisting. But she followed the arc of his body, her head slightly lowered, her ears catching the breeze. Each step was deliberate. Each step is a risk. If the leg buckled, she could fall again. If she fell, she might not rise. If she panicked, the herd might scatter. But she walked. Halfway to the truck, she stopped. Her body turned slightly, just enough for her to glance back. Not with panic, not with hesitation, just a pause. Long enough for the light to catch her face. The vet watched from a distance. The rangers stayed still beneath the acacia. She didn't move for several seconds. Her breath evened. Her trunk hung loosely. Then she turned forward again. She kept walking. Behind her, the hill held its silence. The herd did not move. But as she reached the last few meters to the truck, one of the elephants lifted its trunk and let it sway once in the air, as if scenting the path she had taken. And in the grass between them, the dust began to settle. The sky had shifted by the time Emmanuel returned. It was later in the season now, the kind of early morning that held the weight of dust instead of dew and light that came not in beams, but in soft, broken haze. The trench had dried at the edges, its waterline thinner than before, marked by prints long faded. The grasses had grown tall in the weeks since, and wind brushed them in slow waves across the clearing. He came alone this time. No vet, no truck, just a flask in his hand and the silence of memory clinging to the earth around him. The last time he'd stood here, she'd been lying still in the dirt, the whole corridor waiting on whether she would rise. She had, and they had carried her away. At the rehabilitation site, her recovery had been slow. The leg would never fully return to strength. The muscle remained stiff where the infection had scarred through. But she had eaten. She had walked. And eventually she had rejoined the world beyond fences. The release had been unceremonious. No calls, no farewell gestures. Just a gate opened at dawn, a path cleared, and a quiet walk into wild grass that rose above her knees. She hadn't looked back. Most didn't. Now Emmanuel stood again by the trench. The stone he had placed the flask on that first evening was still there, though dulled by heat and time. The track where she'd collapsed had been softened by wind, erased by days. But something held in the silence. a kind of imprint no weather could shift. He walked slowly toward the edge of the clearing, scanning the hill where the herd had once stood. Nothing moved. The sky was wide and empty. Then, from behind the acacia grove at the far ridge, a low sound stirred. A footfall first, then a shift of weight on dry leaves. One shape appeared, then another. It was her. She moved with caution, her limp unmistakable but not hindering. The herd stayed behind, half visible, grazing quietly in the brush. She was thinner now, as elephants often are after dry weeks, but her ears hung steady, her step deliberate. She paused at the same stretch of ground where she'd once fallen. Her eyes scanned the trench. She made no sound. Emmanuel didn't move. He watched as her trunk lifted slightly, brushing the air once, then lowering to the dirt. She did not come closer. She did not need to. After a long moment, she turned back toward the ridge, her body shifting with effort, her gait uneven but sure. She did not hurry. The herd welcomed her in silence. One younger elephant reached a trunk toward her flank and rested it there briefly before moving on. The line of their movement bent slightly around her, as if making room without words. Emmanuel stood for a while longer, watching the grass ripple in their wake. The wind had picked up just enough to rustle the tallest seed heads, lifting the sound of dry husks across the trench. He didn't call after her. He didn't move toward the herd. Instead, he knelt one last time by the stone, placed the empty flask back in the dust, and rested his hand on the ground. Then he stood. The sun had begun its climb, light catching on the tallest trees at the ridge, and in the hush between hoofbeats and wind, only one thing remained in the space between them: the quiet knowledge that she had returned and she had remembered.